I never liked birthday candles. People always say they look warm and hopeful. All I see is wax melting away too fast while everyone pretends to be happy. Maybe that is how I have looked to them for years, burning slowly and calling it celebration. They held the party at my daughter's house, or I should say Sophia and her husband's house, because nothing inside those walls has ever belonged to her. Not even her voice. She smiled when she opened the door for me and kissed me on the cheek. Her lips were cold. She smelled like expensive perfume that had been sprayed one time too many. The smell of trying. I carried a box of small apple tarts that I baked in the morning even though I knew no one would eat them. It was just something to hold in my hands so they would not shake. The living room was decorated with golden balloons that said 62 in large numbers. I wish they had chosen smaller ones. It is strange how age becomes louder when people stop listening to you. There were flowers on the table, yet none of them were my kind. No wild daisies like the ones I always put on my kitchen window. Only roses arranged in perfect circles like soldiers. The kind of flowers you buy when you want to show effort more than affection. Ethan was pouring wine at the counter. He looked at me like a waiter forced to serve someone who did not tip last time. His smile was made of plastic. I nodded at him and placed the apple tarts on the side table next to the store-bought cheesecake. He did not say thank you. He did not even look at them. My 2 grandchildren were on the couch with their phones. They mouthed a hello without lifting their heads. I almost answered with the same silence. It felt polite. Then Sophia clapped her hands and told everyone to gather for a toast. Everyone meant 7 people. Her 2 kids, her husband, his parents, and me. I stood in the middle like an ornament that no one knew where to place. Ethan raised his glass. He spoke like he was giving a speech at a charity auction. He said it was a special day because a strong woman had reached another milestone. He said he admired my resilience and called me a survivor. Then he laughed in a way that made the word sound like a disease. His father laughed too. Sophia looked at her feet. I held my glass but did not drink. My hands were steady. My spine was straight. I waited for the moment to pass because I had learned that silence can save energy. I thought that was the worst of it. A tasteless speech from a tasteless man. I could handle that. What I could not handle came next. He walked toward me and placed his hand on my shoulder. His grip was too tight. Then he said in front of everyone that he hoped I would not burden them in my old age. He said it like a joke, but no one laughed, not because it was cruel. They were used to cruelty. They were only unsure whether I would laugh with them. I felt the room tilt, not a large tilt, just enough to make me feel like I was standing on a boat tied to a dock that was slowly drifting away. I opened my mouth but no sound came out. Then he did it. He patted my cheek with the back of his hand. It was not a slap. That would have been easier. A slap carries anger, and anger at least acknowledges your existence. This touch was a dismissal, a command to stay in my place. The room stayed silent. No gasp, no objection, not even a cough to break the tension. My daughter looked away. My grandchildren lowered their eyes like they were staring at their own reflections in their screens. His mother whispered something to her husband, probably about how awkward it was, not about how wrong it was. I felt something move inside me. It was not anger. Anger is hot. This was cold, like a door closing in my chest. My heart did not race. It slowed down. I set my glass on the table. I folded both hands in front of me like I was saying grace. Then I turned toward the door. No one stopped me. That told me everything. The night air was colder than I expected. I walked down the pathway made of perfectly cut stones that had no dirt on them. The stones looked cleaner than my hands. I reached the sidewalk and heard the door close behind me. Not a slam, just a quiet click. The kind of sound that tells you it has been closed that way many times before. I did not cry. Tears would have made it feel temporary. This was not a moment. This was a revelation. I stood under a streetlight and looked at my phone. There were no messages from anyone, not even a "where are you going?" I switched it off and placed it in my bag. I did not want any light that I did not choose myself. I did not plan to walk. My knees had been stiff for years, and yet they did not complain. My legs moved like they had been waiting for this command. I passed the corner where I used to wait in my car to pick up Sophia from school. There was a bakery there once, but it had turned into a nail salon with a glowing sign that said "Enjoy yourself." I almost laughed. I had spent 62 years following instructions. Be kind, be quiet, be patient, be grateful, be flexible, be understanding, be invisible. Not once had anyone told me to enjoy myself. A car slowed beside me. For a moment I thought someone would ask if I needed a ride. It was just a delivery driver checking the address on a package. He did not even see me. People pass through life without noticing ghosts. I crossed the street and kept walking until I reached the small convenience store near the gas station. The light above the entrance flickered like it could not decide whether to die or not. I stepped inside. The air smelled like cleaning spray and old coffee. The clerk barely looked up from his magazine. He was chewing something that clicked between his teeth. I walked down the aisle without thinking. My eyes landed on a display of lottery tickets, rows of bright paper squares promising impossible change for a few dollars. I had never bought one before, not because I did not believe in luck. I simply did not believe it belonged to people like me. My hand reached for one, then another. I chose 5 without reading the numbers. I took a bottle of water too. My throat felt dry, though I had not spoken a word. At the counter, the clerk scanned the tickets and asked if I wanted the power bonus. I did not know what that meant, so I nodded. He asked if I felt lucky. I said I felt awake. He shrugged and gave me the change. Outside, I twisted the cap off the water and drank. It tasted like metal. I kept walking toward the motel down the road. I remembered staying there once with my husband when our house had a gas leak. The walls had smelled like wet carpet and disappointment. I wondered if it still smelled the same. The woman at the front desk did not ask questions. She handed me a key attached to a plastic tag with the number 12. I thanked her and climbed the stairs. The hallway carpet looked new, but the air still carried a hint of something sour. I unlocked the door and turned on the light. The bedspread was patterned with blue flowers that looked more like ink stains. The lamp flickered before holding steady. I sat on the edge of the bed and placed my bag on the nightstand. For a few minutes I just sat there. My ears rang from the silence. I could still feel Ethan's hand on my cheek, not the pressure, the intention. It was as if he had stamped a label on me. Useless, unnecessary, disposable. I touched my face to erase the memory, but it only made it clearer. I stood up and looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. My reflection stared back without judgment. Her eyes were not defeated. They were tired. There is a difference. I took the lottery tickets out of my pocket and placed them on the counter. I had bought them without purpose. Now they looked like a challenge. I did not know when the draw would be. I did not care. I lined them in a row like soldiers waiting for inspection. I whispered the numbers without reading them. It felt like reciting a prayer in a foreign language, meaningless yet strangely comforting. I lay down on the bed without changing my clothes. The blanket scratched my skin through my sweater. I stared at the ceiling. There were small cracks that formed a shape like a tree branch. I pretended it was reaching for me. I closed my eyes. Sleep did not come. Memories did, not loud ones, soft ones. Sophia sitting on my lap when she was 5, her hands sticky with jam, her eyes bright with questions. Why is the sky blue? Why do bees buzz? Why do people cry when they are happy? I used to answer every question like it mattered. When did she stop asking? Or did I stop answering? I turned on my side and pressed my face into the pillow. It smelled like bleach. My chest ached, but no tears came. Crying would have given the night more importance than it deserved. This was not tragedy. This was clarity. I reached for the tickets again and held one between my fingers. I imagined what would happen if I won. Probably nothing. I would still be me, alone in a motel room with a plastic key and cracked ceiling. I placed it back and switched off the lamp. Darkness wrapped around me like a blanket that had been waiting its turn for years. I whispered to the empty room, not a wish, not a prayer, just a statement. I am done being silent. Morning did not arrive with sunlight. It arrived with the hum of the vending machine outside my door, a dull, buzzing sound that slipped through the thin walls and crawled into my ears. I opened my eyes and stared at the same cracked ceiling. For a moment, I could not remember where I was. Then the memory of last night landed on my chest like a stack of books. Heavy but familiar. I sat up slowly. My neck ached from sleeping in the wrong position. My sweater was wrinkled and smelled faintly of sweat and motel sheets. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. The mirror showed a woman with red marks on her cheek from the pillowcase, not from Ethan. His touch had left no visible mark. That was the worst part. No proof, only memory. I dried my face with a small towel and looked at myself again. I expected to see sadness, maybe regret, but what I saw was space. Like an empty room that had been cleared out after years of clutter. It was not comfortable, but it was ready for something. I did not know what. I only knew that I could not return to the life I had left behind. It no longer had a place for me. My stomach rumbled. I could not remember the last time I had eaten. I opened my bag and found a granola bar. Probably from a month ago. I took a bite anyway. It tasted like cardboard coated in sugar. I chewed it slowly while staring at the lottery tickets on the counter. 5 small promises staring back at me. I picked one up and turned it over. The print on the back explained how to check the numbers. It mentioned a website and a televised drawing. I put it down. The idea of standing in front of a television to watch someone else read numbers felt absurd. I had spent too many years waiting for others to decide my fate. I wanted to be the one choosing something, even if it was meaningless. I packed my things and left the room. The hallway was still quiet. The woman at the desk nodded at me as I passed. She did not ask if I was checking out. She probably assumed I was stepping out for breakfast. Maybe I was, or maybe I was leaving for good. I was not sure yet. Outside, the sky was pale gray, a color that could turn into anything. Rain, sun, fog. I stepped onto the sidewalk and felt a breeze against my face. It smelled like gasoline and fresh bread. The bakery on the corner must have been open. I walked toward it without deciding to. My feet chose before my mind did. Inside the bakery, the air was warm and thick with the scent of cinnamon. A young woman stood behind the counter arranging pastries in neat rows. She smiled at me without hesitation. Not a polite smile. A real one. The kind people give when they still believe kindness matters. I ordered a coffee and a cinnamon roll. She asked if I wanted it warmed. I said yes. I sat at a small table by the window. The coffee was too hot, but I drank it anyway. The cinnamon roll melted in my mouth like it had been made by someone who cared about mornings. I watched cars pass outside, people going to work, kids holding backpacks, a man walking his dog, all of them moving through routines that made sense. My life used to have routines: make breakfast, sweep the floor, call Sophia to ask how her day was, bake treats for the grandkids, repeat. It was predictable, it was safe, or so I told myself. Now I had no routine, no destination, no plan. The thought should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like breathing after holding my breath underwater. My hands did not tremble. My chest did not tighten. I finished my coffee and sat for a while longer. There was a television mounted on the wall in the corner of the bakery. The news was playing without sound. The screen showed last night's lottery drawing, bright lights and flashing numbers. I stared at them. My heartbeat did not change. I did not remember if those were my numbers. I did not reach into my bag to check. I waited for panic or excitement. Nothing came. I simply watched. The young woman behind the counter noticed me looking and turned the volume up. The announcer was repeating the winning numbers. His voice was cheerful in a way that felt rehearsed. I whispered the numbers under my breath. Not because I wanted to win, I only wanted to know. Then I opened my bag and pulled out the tickets. My fingers did not shake. I held the first one up and read the numbers. For a moment they did not make sense. My mind refused to connect them. Then they aligned. They matched, all of them. Every number on the screen was printed on the ticket in my hand. I did not gasp. I did not stand. I did not shout. I placed the ticket on the table and folded my hands in my lap. My heartbeat remained steady. The world did not tilt. The air did not change. The bakery did not fade into slow motion like in the movies. The only thing that changed was a sentence in my head. It said, "You are no longer at their mercy." I stared at the ticket for a long time, not because I could not believe it. Belief had nothing to do with it. I simply needed a moment to understand what it meant to have power after living so long without it. True power is not noise. It is silence that belongs to you. The girl behind the counter walked over. She asked if I was all right. I looked up and realized I had been sitting completely still with my hands folded like I was praying. I told her I was fine. She pointed at the ticket and said congratulations. Her smile was wide and honest. She looked genuinely happy for me. That startled me more than the winning numbers. I thanked her and folded the ticket carefully, placing it back into my bag. My movements were slow, like I was handling a fragile bird. She asked if I was going to claim it right away. I said no. She blinked. Most people would have run out the door. I remained seated. I drank the last sip of cold coffee and stood up. Outside, the air felt different. The breeze brushed my face like it knew a secret. I walked without direction again, but this time my steps had weight. Not the weight of burden, the weight of choice. I reached the bus stop and sat on the bench. A bus approached, but I did not get on. I waited for it to pass before standing. I thought about calling Sophia. I imagined her voice, polite, controlled, distracted. I imagined telling her that I had won millions. I imagined the pause before she spoke, the calculation in her tone, the quiet hope that maybe now I would become useful again. The thought made my chest tight. I took my phone from my bag and held it in my hand. I stared at the black screen. Then I pressed the power button and turned it on. Notifications flooded the screen. Messages from a family group chat. Pictures from the night before, everyone smiling around a cake. I was not in any of the photos. I had been removed from the narrative before I even left. I held my thumb over the power button again. This time, I did not hesitate. The screen went dark. I placed the phone back into my bag and zipped it shut. If anyone wanted to find me, they would have to try harder than sending digital breadcrumbs. I walked back toward the motel. The woman at the desk looked surprised to see me return. She asked if everything was all right. I said I would be staying another night. She handed me a fresh key card. I thanked her and climbed the stairs. The room smelled the same, bleach and old carpet, but it no longer felt temporary. It felt like a starting point. I sat at the small desk and pulled out a notepad from the drawer, the kind with thin paper and a plastic cover. I clicked the pen and wrote one sentence at the top. "What do you want?" I stared at it. My whole life I had asked, "What do you need? What do you want me to do? How can I help?" I had never asked myself a question without attaching it to someone else. I tapped the pen on the table. I wrote another line, "I want peace." Then another, "I want respect." Then slower, "I want to be seen." The words looked strange on paper, like they belonged to someone else. I ran my fingers over the ink to make sure they were real. Then I folded the paper and placed it in my wallet next to the ticket. A promise beside a possibility. I stood up and walked to the mirror again. I looked into my own eyes and spoke out loud, "You do not owe them your presence." The woman in the mirror did not argue. She lifted her chin slightly. I nodded back. I lay on the bed fully awake. I could have slept. My body was tired, but my mind was clear. I thought about disappearing. Not dying, not running away like a coward, vanishing with intention, leaving the version of me they knew behind. Creating another in a place where I was not defined by history. The idea grew inside me like a candle being lit. It did not flare. It glowed. I whispered again, "You are free." I did not know where I would go or how I would claim the money. I did not need to know everything at once. All I needed was the next step. I reached for my bag. I took out the ticket. I held it against my chest and closed my eyes, not to sleep, to decide. When morning comes, I will not be here. I will not be hers. I will not be theirs. I will be mine. I woke before the sun, not because I set an alarm. My body simply decided that sleep was unnecessary. I sat up and listened to the silence. It was different from the silence at Sophia's house. That one had been heavy and judgmental. This one felt like an open field, wide and untouched. I folded the blanket and placed it at the edge of the bed, a habit I had never broken. Even when I felt angry, I could not leave a space messy. I washed my face and combed my hair with my fingers. I looked at my reflection and whispered, "You leave today." I packed my things with care, not because I was attached to them. There was barely anything in my bag worth keeping. A sweater, a wallet, a half-eaten granola bar, 5 lottery tickets, the folded note that said what I wanted. That note mattered more than anything else. I left the motel key on the desk. I did not stop at the front desk to say goodbye. I walked out without turning around. The morning air was colder than the day before. My breath came out in a thin cloud. I watched it disappear. I imagined myself doing the same. At the bus station, I bought a ticket without looking at the destination. The clerk asked where I was headed. I told him anywhere north. He handed me a slip of paper with a number on it. I thanked him and sat on a bench. People around me stared at their phones, their lives tied to screens. I sat still with my bag in my lap. The bus arrived with a sigh of brakes. I climbed aboard and chose a seat by the window. The fabric was worn and smelled faintly of oranges. I rested my head against the glass. The engine started. The world outside began to move backward. I did not know how long I stayed like that, minutes or hours. Time passed differently when there was no schedule. At some point, I took out my wallet and unfolded the note. Peace, respect, to be seen. I traced each word with my thumb, then I placed it back and pulled out the ticket. The one with the winning numbers. I held it to the light. It glowed slightly in the sun. Most people would have felt excitement. I did not. Excitement is loud. This was quiet certainty. I had the means to erase my past, but I did not want to erase everything. There were things worth remembering. One face appeared in my mind, not Sophia, not my grandchildren, not even my husband from the life I once had. It was Clara, her voice. Soft but firm, her eyes, clear and steady. She had been married to Ethan once. Long before he learned how to make cruelty look like charm, she had not lasted long in that family. She left before they could mold her into one of them. They had called her weak, unstable, difficult. I had called her brave. I remembered the day she visited me after the divorce. She brought flowers, not roses, wild daisies, the kind I loved. She said she was sorry for leaving me behind with them. I told her not to apologize. She said I deserved better. I believed her. For 5 minutes I allowed myself to believe her. Then life returned and I went back to being small. I wondered where she was now. I had not spoken to her in years. We were still connected on a social media site, but I rarely logged in. I looked at my bag. The phone was still inside, powered off. Silent, I hesitated. Then I reached in and took it out. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up. It asked for my passcode. My fingers moved automatically. The home screen appeared with familiar icons. I opened the app I rarely touched. My profile had dust on it. Notifications piled in the corner. I ignored them. I typed her name, Clara Mitchell. Her profile appeared, a picture of her holding a little girl, a toddler with curly hair and a serious face. They stood in front of a playground. Clara smiled. It was the same smile she had when she brought daisies to my door. Strong, tired, determined. Her recent post was from 2 days ago. She had captioned it "Another day, another batch of cinnamon bread. One day I will own a place that smells like this forever." I stared at the photo, flour on her cheek, a baking tray on the counter behind her daughter reaching for a spoon. I felt something move in my chest, not envy, not sadness, recognition. She was still fighting. Quietly, without applause, without rescue, I whispered her name like a secret. Clara. The bus driver announced the next stop, a small town I had never heard of. People stood and gathered their bags. I did not move. I stayed seated. My mind was focused on one decision. I wanted to find her, not to save her, not to be saved by her, but because she was the only person who ever looked at me and did not see a duty. I opened the search bar under her photo and saw her listed workplace, a local bakery called Palmer's Bread. The address was visible. It was only 2 towns away from where this bus was headed. My decision was no longer a question. I folded the ticket and placed it back into my wallet. Then I whispered, "Take me to her." The bus kept moving. The bus rolled through quiet streets lined with small shops and old houses that looked like they had been standing longer than any argument I had endured. The kind of town where people still waved at each other, even if they no longer remembered why. I pressed my forehead against the window and watched them move about their morning. A man swept the sidewalk in front of a hardware store. A woman pulled a reluctant dog along the curb. Life continued with or without me. For once, that did not make me feel small. I checked the bakery address again on my phone, Palmer's Bread, just 5 blocks from the station where I was supposed to get off. My pulse remained steady. I expected nerves, maybe excitement. Instead, I felt anchored, as if every breath had a direction now. When the bus stopped, I stood and slung my bag over my shoulder. The driver nodded as I passed. His eyes lingered on me like he wanted to say something but chose silence instead. I appreciated that. Words were heavy when they were unnecessary. The station was small, just a shelter with a bench and a faded map pinned to a metal board. I stepped onto the pavement and turned left. The air carried the smell of yeast and butter. It wrapped around me gently, like a familiar blanket from childhood that someone had saved in a drawer for years. I followed the scent until I saw the bakery. A narrow building with a red awning and large windows displaying loaves of bread lined neatly like choir members. The door had a bell attached to the handle. I hesitated before entering. I needed a second to prepare my face, not to smile, just to soften it enough to be seen without walls. I pushed the door open. The bell chimed. The warmth hit me before the sight did. Ovens humming, flour floating in the air like dust in sunlight. A young man stood behind the counter kneading dough. He looked up and greeted me with a cheerful good morning. His voice bounced off the walls easily. He asked what he could get me. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My eyes were searching the room for her. She emerged from the back with a tray of fresh rolls. Her hair was tied in a loose bun with strands falling around her face. There was flour on her cheek again. I wondered if she ever noticed it. She placed the tray on the counter and thanked the young man. Then she turned toward me. Her eyes landed on mine. She froze, her lips parted slightly. She did not smile. She did not frown. She simply looked, really looked, as if she was trying to see past the years and the silence between us. I stood still, letting her take her time. Then she said my name. Reagan. It was not a question. It was recognition, memory, relief, and hesitation woven into one breath. I nodded once. "Hello, Clara." The young man glanced between us, sensing a shift. He asked softly if everything was all right. Clara told him to take his break. Her tone was gentle but firm enough to leave no room for argument. He wiped his hands and disappeared to the back, closing the door quietly behind him. She stepped closer, not too close, enough to speak without raising her voice. She asked how long it had been. I said too long. She asked why I was there. I opened my mouth. But instead of an answer, I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, from release. I said I needed to see someone who remembers me when I was still visible. Her expression softened. She set the tray aside and wiped her hands on her apron. She gestured toward a small table near the window. I sat. She brought 2 cups of tea without asking if I wanted one. She remembered. I had always preferred tea in the morning. We sat in silence for a moment, not the kind that burns, the kind that breathes. She asked again softly what happened. I exhaled slowly. The words did not rush out. They flowed like a river freed from a dam. I told her about the birthday, the speech, the hand on my cheek, the silence that followed. I did not cry while speaking. My voice did not crack. I had already mourned that moment when I walked out of the house. Now I was simply documenting it. She listened without interrupting. Her eyes did not look away even once. That alone felt like healing. When I finished, she placed her hand on the table, palm up, not touching mine. Offering, I placed my hand on top of hers. Her skin was warm and steady. She asked where I was staying. I said nowhere. She asked if I was running. I said no, I was leaving. There is a difference. She nodded like she understood. Then she asked the question I had expected. Why come to me? I answered without hesitation. Because you were the last person who knew how to be kind without expecting anything in return. Her eyes shone, not with pity, with understanding. Clara kept her hand under mine for a while before pulling it back gently to sip her tea. The steam rose between us like a curtain, yet I felt no distance, only the comfort of being in a room where my existence was not questioned. She asked softly what I planned to do now. I answered honestly that I had no plan, only the certainty that I would not return to the house I left. She studied me for a moment, her eyes searching, then she tilted her head and asked the question I had been expecting all along. Why me, Reagan? Why did you come to me instead of your daughter? Her words did not sound like accusation, only curiosity, but they sliced through me anyway. I looked at the table instead of her face. My fingers traced the rim of the cup while I spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. Because my daughter does not stand beside me anymore. Clara's brow furrowed as if she wanted to push further, but she stopped, sensing I was not ready to bleed that deeply yet. The tea cooled between us, and after a while she spoke again. I have been trying to save enough to start a place of my own, a bakery where the air smells like cinnamon all day. But it feels like chasing the horizon. Every time I get close, it moves further away. Her voice held no bitterness, only fatigue. I thought of the winning ticket folded inside my wallet, and for the first time since discovering it, I felt purpose rising in my chest. I told her that maybe horizons are not meant to be chased, maybe they are meant to be built, brick by brick, loaf by loaf. She laughed quietly, shaking her head, and said she admired how I could still speak in metaphors after everything. I answered that metaphors were free, unlike courage, which had cost me most of my life. We sat in silence again, but it was not the painful silence of my birthday evening. It was a silence filled with possibilities. I leaned back and studied Clara. Her face was older, lined with struggle, but her smile still carried warmth. I asked her how her daughter was, the little girl with the serious eyes from the photo. She softened instantly, describing how stubborn and curious the child was, how she wanted to taste the dough before it was baked, how she refused to go to bed without a story. As she spoke, I saw light in Clara's eyes that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with love. The idea formed in me like dough rising quietly under a cloth. I asked her what it would take to open that bakery, not in dreams but in reality. She hesitated, then listed the obstacles, the rent for a space, the equipment, the permits, the endless hours of labor. She shook her head before finishing, almost ashamed to speak of it. I reached across the table and touched her wrist. What if you would help? She blinked at me, puzzled. I told her I wanted to invest, that I had resources now. She stared, half disbelieving, half afraid to believe. Where would you get that kind of money, Reagan? I smiled faintly. Let's just say fortune visited me when I least expected it. Her suspicion was natural. She asked if this was about revenge, if I wanted to build something just to spite Sophia and Ethan. I shook my head firmly. This is not about them. This is about us. About women who were told too many times to sit down quietly. I want to stand up again, and I want to stand next to someone who remembers that I was never invisible. Clara's eyes glistened. She whispered that it sounded impossible, but so did leaving Ethan once, and she had survived that. I told her survival is the first step, but living is the second, and it was time for both of us to take it. We finished our tea slowly, each sip carrying unspoken promises. When we finally stood, she pressed a paper bag into my hand, warm bread inside. Take this, she said, you need strength. I smiled, perhaps the first genuine smile in months, and replied, no, Clara, we need strength. She laughed then, a sound full of cracks and sunlight, and for a moment I could almost see the bakery she dreamed of standing right between us, alive and waiting. Clara insisted on closing the shop early that day. The young man returned from his break just in time to see her handing me another cup of tea for the road. He raised an eyebrow as if trying to decode the sudden shift in her usually guarded demeanor, but he said nothing. Clara had that kind of authority, quiet yet unquestionable. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, warming the pavement with soft gold. We walked side by side without speaking at first, letting the rhythm of our footsteps speak for us. Her daughter was still at daycare, and we had a few hours before she needed to pick her up. She led me through narrow streets lined with small businesses, pointing at empty storefronts occasionally with casual remarks like this one used to be a flower shop or that place never survived summer. I listened carefully, trying to imagine each space as something new. When we reached a quiet corner near a park, she stopped in front of a closed-down antique store. The windows were dusty but wide, and the door had a small bell still attached. She placed her hand on the glass inside. If I could choose, it would be this one. The light is perfect in the mornings. I asked why she had not tried, and she shrugged. Rent is high. Repairs would cost a fortune. Dreams are free, but buildings are not. I stood beside her, studying the place. The facade was old but sturdy. The wooden frame looked worn yet proud, like an elder refusing to bow. I said quietly, what if we did not ask for permission from our fears this time? She turned to look at me, her lips parting slowly as if the possibility itself was too fragile to touch. We sat on the bench near the park, and I finally told her everything. I described the moment I realized I had won the lottery, the strange calm that followed, the certainty that money could fix many things except loneliness. Her hands trembled slightly as she listened. When I finished, she leaned back and stared at the sky as if trying to absorb the weight of it all without breaking. Then she spoke in a voice steadier than I expected. If we do this, we do it properly. No handouts, no pity, a partnership, equal decisions, equal effort. If you want to invest, you work beside me. I nodded. I had not come to be a benefactor. I had come to build a life. She looked at me then, searching for hesitation. There was none. She extended her hand. I placed mine in hers. That was the moment Morning Bloom was born, not in a legal document nor on a signboard, but in the clasp of two women's hands on a weathered bench. The next hours were spent planning with the eagerness of two children drawing castles in dirt. She spoke of ovens and display shelves, of recipes she perfected over the years, of a corner where people could sit and drink coffee slowly without being rushed out. I spoke of warmth, of music that did not intrude, of flowers on each table, daisies if possible. We argued about paint colors even though we had not secured the building yet. She wanted cream. I wanted pale green. We compromised on soft yellow, which felt like sunlight that stayed even on cloudy days. By the time she had to pick up her daughter, the sky had shifted into evening hues. She looked at me with a question lingering in her eyes. Where will you stay tonight? I told her I would find a motel again. She frowned. No, you stay at my place. I hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but she raised an eyebrow with familiar firmness. If you are my partner, then you do not sleep in motels. Partners do not abandon each other at the end of the day. Her house was small but alive. Toys scattered in the living room, the smell of cinnamon still hanging in the air. Her daughter eyed me cautiously at first, gripping her mother's leg, but curiosity won faster than fear. She asked my name and I told her. She repeated it carefully like she was tasting it. Then she asked if I liked dragons. I said I preferred lions. She considered this and nodded slowly as if approving my answer. That night we sat at the small kitchen table while her daughter slept. Clara spread papers across the surface, scribbling numbers, estimating costs, calculating risks. I watched her focused expression and felt something strange in my chest, something I had not felt in decades. Purpose. Not borrowed, not assigned. Earned. Before we went to bed, she looked at me and asked again in softer tone, why did you not help Sophia? This time I did not look away, because she chose not to help me when I needed her, because she saw me being pushed aside and decided silence was easier, because I will no longer beg to be chosen by someone who turned their back on me first. Clara nodded slowly, not to judge but to acknowledge. Then she whispered, you are not alone anymore. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it. I lay on the couch that night with a blanket she insisted I take, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping outside. I did not dream. I did not need to. My dream was already awake. Morning Bloom did not appear overnight. It grew the way bread rises in silence, slow and steady, becoming more than what it started as while no one is watching. We cleaned the old antique store for 3 days straight until our arms ached. The dust clung to my hair like it had waited decades for someone to disturb it. Clara's daughter sat in the corner with crayons, asking if she could name the bakery herself. She suggested Golden Toast Palace. We told her we would consider it seriously, which made her beam with pride. When the paint went on the walls, the space transformed. The soft yellow we had chosen made the room glow even when the sky outside was dull. We bought second-hand tables and sanded them by hand. Clara insisted every table should feel like someone's home, not someone's purchase. I polished the bell on the door until it rang bright and sharp. On the day the ovens were installed, I stood with my hand on the metal frame and whispered silently that this was my church now. No altar, no preacher, just heat and effort. The first batch of bread burned. We laughed so hard that Clara's daughter covered her ears. The second batch came out pale. By the third batch, Clara finally nodded with approval. We sliced it open and the steam curled into the air like a prayer. I tasted it and felt tears in my eyes, not because of the flavor, because I had created something that did not ask who I was to deserve it. It simply was warm, present, real. Word traveled fast in small towns. People walking past slowed down to peek through the windows. Some smiled, some frowned, suspicious of change. One woman pressed her face to the glass and mouthed as it opened. Clara waved her inside even though we had not officially launched. She ordered a coffee and a slice of cinnamon bread. She ate in silence with her eyes closed as if trying to remember something she had lost long ago. When she finished, she said aloud to no one in particular, "This tastes like childhood." Then she left money on the counter and walked out before we could thank her. By the end of the week, more people had wandered in. A mailman, a group of high school girls. An elderly couple who asked if we had lemon tarts. Clara added them to the menu the next day. I watched customers come and go, their faces softening as they stepped into the warmth. No one recognized me, or if they did, they pretended not to. I was grateful. I was not ready to explain myself yet. I was content to be known simply as the older woman behind the counter who refilled coffee cups without being asked. One afternoon, while wiping the windows, I noticed a young woman standing across the street taking a photo of the storefront with her phone. She wore stylish clothes that did not match the town. She looked like someone passing through. She smiled at me and gave a thumbs up before walking away. I thought nothing of it until the next morning when a group of college kids entered, laughing and pointing at their phones. One held up the screen to show Clara. There was our bakery displayed on a local food blog with the caption "Secret Bakery run by two mysterious women." They called us inspiring. They wrote about the smell that lingered even after leaving, about the taste of our bread being better than therapy. Clara laughed and blushed. I felt warmth in my chest, but also a small drop of unease. Praise attracts curiosity. Curiosity invites questions. Questions lead to exposure. The next day, a man came in and stared at me too long. He ordered nothing. He simply stood by the door with narrowed eyes. When I approached to ask if he needed help, he asked bluntly, "Aren't you Reagan Wallace?" My heart thudded once. I held his gaze and answered calmly, "I used to be." He frowned and left without another word. Clara watched from behind the counter. She did not ask anything until closing time. Then she dried her hands on a towel and said quietly, "They will start to talk." I nodded. "Let them." She studied me and asked if I was ready for it. I said no, but I am not running this time. That night, after Clara and her daughter had gone to bed, I sat alone in the bakery with only the oven light glowing behind me. I held the winning ticket in my hand, folded so many times the edges had softened. I whispered to it like a promise. I did not build this place to hide. I built it to stand. If they come, let them see. The days that followed felt like standing in warm sunlight while watching storm clouds gather at the edge of the horizon. Customers kept coming, and the bakery filled with laughter and conversation. Yet every time the bell above the door rang, I felt a subtle tightening in my chest, a quiet alertness ready to brace for impact. Clara noticed it too. She moved with purpose, kneading dough like she was preparing for battle rather than breakfast. Neither of us said it aloud, but we both knew peace had an expiration date. It happened on a Tuesday morning when the air outside was still damp with sunrise. A woman entered carrying a tablet in her hand and a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. She ordered nothing. She asked questions instead. "How long have you been open? Who owns this place? Are you hiring?" Casual questions delivered with unnatural precision. When I asked where she was from, she flashed a press badge. A small blog that pretended to be harmless but thrived on local drama. She said she was doing a feature on inspiring women starting over later in life. Her tone was sweet, but her gaze was sharp, searching my face for cracks. Before I could answer, Clara stepped forward and said we were too busy to do interviews. The woman smiled like a cat being denied milk. She thanked us and left, but not before taking one last sweeping photo of the interior. By evening, the article was online. It called us resilient and brave, but ended with a single loaded line. Some locals claim one of the owners has a complicated past. No details, no accusations, just enough poison to stir curiosity. The next morning, half our customers were warmer than ever, offering support like we had fought a war. The other half watched us like we were thieves wearing borrowed kindness. Then came the first message. Someone slid an envelope under the door before we opened. Inside was a printed photo of me taken years ago at a family gathering. I was standing next to Sophia, smiling with pride while holding my grandson as a baby. On the back of the photo were 4 handwritten words. "Why did you leave them?" My hands trembled for the first time in weeks. Clara saw and took the photo from me, crumpling it without reading the back. She told me not to let ghosts write my future. I wanted to agree, but ghosts have a way of speaking even when uninvited. I should have expected what came next, but foolishly I did not. Late in the afternoon, a familiar car parked across the street. Black, polished, owned by a man who considered the world his reflection. Ethan stepped out wearing the same smile he used when delivering fake compliments. He stood on the pavement and stared through the window as if examining merchandise. My blood cooled. Clara followed my gaze and stilled. He did not enter. He simply watched for a full minute before returning to his car. He drove away slowly, making sure I knew this was not a visit. It was a warning. That night I could not sleep. I lay on the couch while Clara breathed softly in the next room and her daughter murmured in dreams down the hall. The bakery across the street sat in the dark like a loyal guardian. I imagined its walls whispering that it would protect me, but walls cannot stop words, and words were coming. The next morning, Sophia called. Her name appeared on my phone screen with a vibration that rattled against the counter. I stared at it until the call ended. She called again. I let it ring. On the third attempt, I answered. Her voice was tight, like she had rehearsed sounding calm but forgot how to breathe. "Mother, we need to talk." I said evenly, "We have nothing to discuss." She replied sharply, "People are talking. Do you know what you are doing?" I felt something rise inside me, not fear, fury. I spoke quietly. "The question is not if I know what I am doing. It is whether you know what you did." She fell silent. I did not wait for a response. I hung up. Clara found me wiping the counter with more force than necessary. She did not speak. She simply placed a fresh cup of tea beside me. I wrapped my hands around it and let the warmth calm me. She asked softly if I regretted any of it. I shook my head. "Regret is for mistakes. This is not one." She smiled then, small but fierce. "Good, then let them come. We have ovens. We can throw bread at them." I laughed despite myself. The laughter echoed through the bakery like a battle cry made of cinnamon and hope. For a brief moment I believed that might be enough, but deep inside I knew the real storm had not yet arrived. It was gathering strength, waiting for the moment I was most exposed, and it would not knock when it came. It would kick the door in. Sophia arrived without calling first. I saw her through the bakery window, standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed and her jaw clenched in that familiar way she had since she was a teenager and did not want to cry in front of others. She hesitated before entering, pushing the door slowly as if the bell above it might bite. The bakery was empty except for me. Clara had taken her daughter to school and gone to meet with a supplier. The timing felt less like coincidence and more like fate clearing the room for what needed to happen. She stood near the entrance without moving further. Her eyes darted across the space, taking in the tables, the flowers on the counter, the smell of freshly baked bread. She did not compliment it. She did not even pretend to be impressed. She looked at me instead and said in a careful voice, "We need to talk." I wiped my hands on my apron and leaned against the counter, refusing to stand like an employee in my own sanctuary. "So talk." She approached slowly, like someone nearing a wounded animal. I wondered which one of us she thought was dangerous. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The words finally came out flat and heavy. "You left without saying a word. People are asking questions. Do you have any idea what this is doing to our family?" I felt my lips curl into something that was not quite a smile. "Our family?" Interesting choice of words. I replied quietly, "A family that watches while one of their own is humiliated does not get to claim me when it is convenient." Her cheeks flushed, her voice rose. "It was a joke, Mother. You are overreacting." I could not help the laugh that escaped me. A joke is only funny when both people laugh. She stiffened. "You are being unfair. Ethan did not mean to hurt you. He was nervous." He drinks too much sometimes. I cut her off with one sharp sentence. You knew. The words silenced her more effectively than any scream. I watched her eyes widen, watched her inhale sharply as if I had struck her. I repeated it softly. You knew what he was going to do? She shook her head too quickly. No, I saw the tremor in her hands. She looked at the floor. Mother, please. I stepped forward slowly until I stood directly in front of her. My voice was low but unyielding. He told you beforehand. Maybe not in exact words. Maybe in laughter. Maybe in that smug little way he hints at cruelty disguised as humor. And you stayed silent because it was easier to keep the peace than defend the woman who gave you life. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back stubbornly. She lifted her chin and spoke in a voice that cracked anyway. You do not understand. If I had stopped him, it would have caused a scene. He would have got angry. The kids would have been scared. Our marriage, I raised my hand, not to strike her, but to cut the words before they poisoned the air further. Your marriage, your comfort, your image, all of it more important than my dignity. She covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders trembled. I felt no pity, only a deep sorrow that tasted like iron. She whispered through her fingers, I was scared. I was trying to keep everything together. I asked quietly, and who was keeping me together? She said nothing. I turned away and walked to the window, watching people pass outside unaware of the war happening inside. My voice softened but did not waver. I am not angry that he insulted me. Men like him always find someone to crush so they can feel tall. I am angry that my own daughter watched and let it happen. That is a betrayal I cannot ignore. She approached slowly until she stood behind me. Her voice was barely audible. I am sorry. I did not respond. Her apology hung in the air like smoke, visible yet without weight. She reached for my arm hesitantly. I did not pull away, but I did not turn either. She asked in a trembling voice, can I fix this? I closed my eyes. This is where I stopped being her mother in the old way. The version of me that always soothed her tears and forgave without hesitation died the moment she chose silence over protection. I turned around finally. My face was calm. My words were precise. You cannot fix what you broke, but you can choose who you will be from now on. Not for me, for yourself. I will not carry the weight of your guilt. I carried enough already. She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something else, but the door opened before she could. A customer walked in, smiling cheerfully, unaware of the fragile moment he had stepped into. I greeted him politely, my voice steady. Sophia stepped back, wiping her face quickly before exiting without a word. She left the door open behind her. I did not close it. I thought Sophia would return the next day, maybe calmer, maybe ready to face what had been said between us. Instead, it was Ethan who arrived. The bell above the door rang violently as he shoved it open with more force than necessary. Clara and I were behind the counter, arranging pastries, while two customers sat near the window enjoying their coffee. His presence hit the room like a gust of cold air. He did not bother with greetings. He marched straight toward me with his chest puffed like a rooster in search of an audience. So this is where you have been hiding, he said loudly, spreading his arms as if displaying a circus act. Leaving your family to play bakery with strangers. His voice cut through the bakery's warm atmosphere like a blade dipped in oil. I did not respond. I simply continued wiping the counter. My refusal to react made him angrier. He pointed at me and turned to the other customers. Can you believe this? She abandons her own children, then shows up here pretending to be some saint. The couple near the window froze, unsure whether to leave or stay. Clara stepped forward then, placing herself slightly in front of me, her tone measured and steady. Sir, you need to lower your voice or leave. He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Or what? You will throw a muffin at me. He moved closer, invading the space between us. Clara did not flinch. I admired her for that. He turned back to me. You think you can just walk away and start over without consequences? People are talking. Our family name is being dragged through the mud because of you. I finally looked up at him. My voice was calm. Your reputation is damaged because you exposed who you are without realizing people were watching. Do not blame me for your reflection. His face reddened. He slammed his hand on the counter, rattling the cups. Clara's daughter, who had been coloring in the corner, jolted and looked up with wide, frightened eyes. That sight made something simmer within me, not rage but resolve. I stepped forward and placed myself between him and the little girl. You may speak to me however you wish, I said quietly, but you will not frighten a child in my bakery. He sneered, your bakery. Since when did you become anything more than a burden? You think a few loaves of bread make you important. You are still the same pathetic woman who needs rescuing. I did not raise my voice. That was his battlefield. Mine was control. I leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "I am not the one who needs rescuing, Ethan. The man who cannot feel powerful without stepping on women is the one drowning." His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to retort, but at that moment the door opened again. Sophia entered, breathless, as if she had been running. She took one look at the scene and hurried forward, grabbing Ethan's arm. "Stop it. Please, you promised you would not do this." His eyes flickered with annoyance. He shrugged her off. She turned to me then. Her voice trembled. "Mother, please, you are making things worse." That sentence hung between us like a rotten fruit. I am making things worse. Not the man pounding counters and humiliating me in public. Not the daughter who had stayed silent through it all. Me, the woman finally standing her ground. I wiped my hands calmly on my apron and stepped away from them both. I spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "I left your house quietly. I did not drag anyone's name anywhere. You brought this circus here yourselves. If you want a stage, go shout in your own living room. This place is for peace." Clara moved beside me, her stance resolute. Another customer stood as well, a stranger but not neutral anymore. He said firmly, "Sir, you should go. This is not the place for whatever this is." Ethan glared at him. "Mind your own business." The man crossed his arms. "It became mine the moment you disrupted everyone's morning." For the first time, Ethan hesitated. He looked around the room, realizing he had lost the crowd. Sophia tugged his sleeve again, pleading softly. He cursed it under his breath and finally turned to leave, his pride dragging like a torn cloak behind him. Sophia followed him to the door, but before stepping out she glanced back at me. Her eyes were wet. She whispered, "I am trying." I did not answer. Trying is not the same as doing. She left. The bakery fell silent. Clara touched my arm gently. "Are you all right?" I nodded. My hands were steady. My voice did not shake. I walked to the door and locked it for a moment, turning the sign to closed. Then I stood in the center of the room and breathed deeply. My chest expanded, not with relief but with something far stronger. Certainty. I had spent my entire life begging to be respected. Today I realized respect is not given, it is claimed, and I had claimed it without raising my voice. The storm had passed, but the air still crackled with tension. I knew it was not over. Ethan would not let go easily. Sophia would waver between guilt and denial. More eyes would turn our way. Journalists. Neighbors, curious onlookers. Let them look, let them wonder, let them talk. For the first time, I was not afraid of being seen. The next morning, I unlocked the bakery earlier than usual. The sky was still the color of wet clay and the street lamps had not yet turned off. I stood at the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. The scent of flour and yeast greeted me like an old friend. I touched the counter with my fingertips as if taking its pulse. Strong, steady, alive. The memory of yesterday's chaos hovered at the edge of my mind, but it did not poison the room. Conflict leaves marks, yes, but sometimes it scrapes away the rot and shows the strength beneath. Clara entered soon after, carrying a basket of fresh apples. She set them down and studied my face carefully. She did not ask if I was all right. Instead, she asked, "Are we ready?" I nodded. She smiled, brief but bright. Then she tied her apron and began kneading dough as if nothing had happened. That was her style: acknowledge pain, then feed it warm bread until it softens. The bell above the door rang at exactly 7. Not a rush of people, just one man in a blue jacket. He hesitated near the entrance before stepping inside. He ordered coffee quietly and sat by the window. He kept glancing at me as if debating whether to speak. When I finally brought his cup, he cleared his throat. "I was here yesterday." He paused. I saw what happened. He looked down at his hands. "I just wanted to say, you handled it with more dignity than most people could." I nodded in thanks without making it grand. He smiled awkwardly and sipped his coffee. That was it. No dramatic applause, no promises, just acknowledgement. A seed planted in silence. More customers arrived. Some avoided mentioning yesterday entirely. Others spoke openly, condemning Ethan's behavior as if declaring allegiance. A woman bought 3 loaves and whispered, "Strong women frighten weak men. Do not dim your light." I thanked her, but internally I corrected the statement. I was not shining to frighten. I was shining because I had spent too long in the dark. By noon the bakery was full. Clara's daughter sat at her usual corner drawing pictures of dragons and lions eating bread together. I glanced at it and smiled. She looked up and announced loudly to the customers, "My mom is the strongest person in the world." Then she pointed at me. "And she is too." The room chuckled. I felt warmth pool in my chest. Children understand truth with far more clarity than adults. The door opened again. My breath caught before I could stop it. It was Sophia. She entered slowly, holding something in her hands, a paper bag. She approached the counter without meeting my eyes. Clara observed cautiously from the side but did not intervene. Sophia placed the bag in front of me. I baked these this morning, your apple tarts, the ones you used to make for us. I did not speak. She continued, her voice barely audible. I remembered the recipe. I wanted to bring them yesterday, but she looked up finally. Her eyes were swollen, her posture stiff like a soldier awaiting judgment. I waited. She swallowed hard. I know you do not owe me forgiveness. I know words are cheap. But I am here, not to justify, not to pretend, just to stand. The bakery fell into hush. Even the oven timer seemed to hold its breath. I lifted the bag and opened it. The tarts were slightly misshapen, the crust uneven. The apples cut too thick. They were imperfect. They were honest. I placed the bag behind the counter and met her gaze. Standing is a start. She exhaled as if she had been underwater. Tears fell, but she did not hide them this time. She whispered, I want to learn how to be different. I nodded and turned away to serve another customer. I did not embrace her. I did not declare reconciliation. Healing is not performance. It is repetition. If she wanted to change, she would return again tomorrow. And the day after, words were wind, presence was proof. She left quietly, but not the way she had arrived. She walked straighter, not forgiven but not discarded either. Later that evening, after closing, Clara and I sat at one of the tables with tea. The bakery was dim except for the light above us. She asked what I would do if Sophia truly tried to make amends. I sipped my tea before answering. I will let her walk beside me, but not ahead of me, not behind me. If she wants me in her life again, she must meet me as an equal. Clara nodded. That is not revenge, that is balance. As we sat there, I noticed something on the front window. A small card taped from the outside. I stood and walked over. On the card were handwritten words. Thank you for reminding us that starting over is not just for the young. No signature, no clue who wrote it. I ran my fingers across the ink and smiled. Some people apologize with words. Others apologize with presence. And some apologize simply by watching you rise and choosing to rise too. The day had been long, heavy, beautiful. I locked the door and turned off the lights. As I stepped outside, the evening wind brushed my face. It no longer felt like a warning. It felt like an invitation. The morning of our official reopening arrived brighter than expected, not because the sun was particularly generous, but because I woke without dread. For years, I had started every day with weight on my chest. Today there was only breath, steady, unhurried, present. Clara arrived with her daughter dancing circles around her legs. They had brought extra flowers to decorate the entrance. We placed them in baskets by the doorway, ignoring the few curious onlookers loitering across the street with cameras in hand. If they wanted to witness, let them. I was done living in the shadows of other people's intentions. By 8 o'clock, the first customers arrived. Then more, and more. Soon the bakery was full. Laughter mixed with the clink of cutlery and the tapping of cups against saucers. It no longer sounded like noise. It sounded like belonging. At some point, I found myself standing near the entrance, simply observing. People greeted me by name. A woman brought me a small plant and said, "So it always stays green here." A teenager left a drawing of a phoenix on the counter with a note that read, "For when you forget how you rose." Clara nudged me with her elbow and whispered, "Famous without even needing the internet." I was about to laugh when I noticed movement at the edge of the crowd. A figure lingered near the door. Sophia. She did not enter. She did not wave. She simply stood still, clutching something in her hand. Before I could react, she stepped forward, placed a small white envelope on the table closest to me, and then turned to leave. She did not look back. No performance. No pleading. Just presence. My hands remained at my sides. I did not rush to open it. Instead, I served 3 more customers before finally walking over and picking it up. The envelope was plain, unsealed. I slipped the paper out. There were only 7 words written in her handwriting. "Give me time. I am learning." I traced the letters slowly before folding it again. I did not cry, not because it did not move me, but because my tears had already done their job. This moment required clarity, not collapse. I walked behind the counter and slid the note between the pages of the bakery's accounting book, a reminder not of sorrow but of movement. Healing does not need to be poetic. It just needs to be consistent. Later in the afternoon, when the rush finally eased, I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The sky was beginning to soften into evening. Clara joined me, handing me a cup of iced tea. Her daughter stood between us, holding each of our hands. We stood there silently, watching the people coming and going. Couples, teenagers, elderly neighbors, some carried bread, some carried nothing. Yet all of them had walked through doors I once thought I no longer deserved to open. Clara asked quietly, "Do you realize what you built?" I shook my head. "No, we built this," she smiled. Her daughter nodded fiercely as if swearing loyalty. I looked at the sign above the door. Morning Bloom. It was meant to symbolize a new beginning. I had thought it referred to the bakery. Now I knew better. It referred to me. I lifted my chin and breathed in the air. Flour, sugar, warmth, life. Once I believed my worth depended on being needed. Now I understood that freedom comes from being known, not celebrated, not worshipped. Simply seen, I had been invisible for so long that I had forgotten the shape of my own outline. Today I stood fully in it. The wind brushed across my shoulders. I did not shiver, I welcomed it. I was not young. I was not untouched by pain. But I was standing. And for the first time in my life, I felt exactly where I was meant to be.